Thank you. Well, welcome, conference, to this question and answer session with the leader of the Liberal Democrats. The way that this session will work is we've got a huge number of questions that have been submitted, and we're going to try and get through as many as we can. I'm going to read out the question. We'll then hopefully get an answer. The questioner will then have the opportunity for a supplementary. We'll then try and take a couple of questions from the hall on the same subject area and then move on to the next subject area. If you do want to ask a question from the hall, then if you put up your hand, Tim will choose a couple of people, and if you wait till the auditorium stewards get to you with a handheld mic, that would be great. Please do keep your questions brief and, importantly, to the subject area. So it's now my pleasure to welcome to the stage the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Tim Farron. Right, thank you, Tim. The first question is from Peter Canning from South Cambridgeshire. So if Peter wants to ask a supplementary, if he could make his way to the intervention mic, which is to my right and to your left. Peter's question is on the themes that we wish to campaign on. So what are the main national themes you would like us to campaign on?
Okay, well, Peter, thank you very much. When I became leader, as well as appointing a team of 20 or so national spokespeople, which incidentally is the first time we've ever managed to do more than gender balance in terms of a national team of spokespeople for the party. I also appointed a team of 7 people who would be members of the parliamentary campaign team, chaired by Greg Mulholland. Those 7 areas are, as it stands at the moment, housing, mental health, migration, Europe, human rights, civil liberties, the green economy, and rural affairs. Now, I'll not unpick all of those, but 2 I want to just pick on in particular. The first, though, obviously, is housing. And in terms of us being able to campaign in our communities with our focus leaflets and everything else that we do, I've made a judgment. Not only is housing something that I am personally very, very passionate about and have been all my life, but secondly, I make the calculation that everybody has to live somewhere. And you may have a very comfortable housing situation, in which case I'm very pleased for you. But there's every chance that your children don't have that fortune. And indeed, your grandchildren won't have that privilege. And so what I want us to do is to pick on the housing need and beat of this country and speak to every community and to pick a clear range of issues that will demonstrate to the country that we are the party that gets housing. Not a party that is absolutely ideologically committed to only state social rented homes and only committed to there not being any social rented homes, but a party that believes that nothing robs you of your freedom more than poor housing. And so I want to make sure that we're the party that focuses not just on preventing the Tories selling off housing association properties, but also on backing the housing associations to build the hundreds of thousands of homes that we need, not just for social rent, but for shared ownership and for market sale as well, to cross-subsidise those social rented properties. But I'll just pick a second issue briefly as well, because we have to be able to speak from our values about the issues which are topical or may not be of our choosing. And over the last 2 months, we have done everything we can to make sure we set a lead and take a lead on the refugee crisis across Europe. And I want us to be able to speak to people on this issue. And I'm in one sense, I am not unduly concerned if the majority of the British people and the media don't agree with our principled humanitarian position on refugees, because there are millions of people out there, and I'm going to call them liberals, by the way, millions of people out there who believe that the first thing you do in the case of a refugee crisis like this is to think about the other, to think about fellow human beings as fellow human beings and not to run scared of people. But I went on and I spoke at the refugee march a week and a half ago, and I did so for two reasons. One is to try to persuade and add extra pressure on our government to be more decent, to work as a colleague with our European partners rather than standing as a cold, isolated figure being increasingly irrelevant on the international stage, but also to be humanitarian and lending a hand to those people in desperate need. It wasn't just, though, that. It wasn't only to try to move our government in the right direction. The second reason I went on that demonstration is because I want the people of European countries other than this one, the people of other countries around the world, to look at Britain and realise that it is a better and more decent place than David Cameron makes out that it is. So I would love you to campaign on the refugee crisis. Okay.
Thank you. Peter, did you have a supplementary? No? Who wants to take a
Peter, thank you.
couple
Yeah,
of
happily. So if I can see a couple of hands, I'll take one there and one there. Go for it.
Is it you?
I can remember when you were campaigning and coming to Chippenham. My name's Mary Farron
I
from
know
Chippenham.
it is. Yes.
That I said the most important thing was housing. I wish that we weren't having in our area hundreds of thousands of houses planted on us, not to build our communities, not to build the homes that we need, but for the high-paid people living in London, because we're fortunate enough or not, living on the M4 motorway and very good rail service, Great Western. What I want to say is so many people paying hideous rents because Tories lifted the rent control business in '96. I want to know whether you would support, coming from our party alone, the right to buy private rented houses at a discount. I'm hoping you
There you
get
are.
that.
Well, Mary, it's a good question. And you talk about the fact that essentially the housing market is a broken market. It is one of these rare products that people buy and that then gain in value. And so people who've got enough money to have more than one home will sometimes buy more than one home. And I represent a constituency where 1 in 7 homes is not lived in the Lake District. And that is a huge damage to our community in terms of pushing up house prices. It also robs communities of life, because every home that is a bolt hold for somebody wealthy enough to afford a place that they just visit 3 or 4 times a year is a home that is not providing children for the local school or demand for the local post office, and it absolutely robs communities of their very heart. In terms of allowing people to be able to buy their own home, I'm absolutely keen that we give people a right to buy a home. What I'm against is forcing housing associations to sell off homes that are for everybody and allowing people to have access to an affordable home. So that's why I believe that. So I'm not anti-rented, private rented housing. What I do believe, though, is that we should make sure that private rented housing is good quality, is affordable, and people have stable rents. I see it, and I saw it when I was being brought up in my part of the world, and I see it obviously in London all the time, and indeed in the area where I represent today. I see people who have to change their kids' schools every other year, indeed sometimes every other term, because of the insecurity of that tenancy. And that's what I mean by housing being a fundamental to liberalism and to freedom. It's not just, we don't do this just because we are kind people, because we are compassionate people, we are, but we do it because we believe decent housing unlocks your freedom to do everything else. And
Bob Wootton of Torridge, West Devon. Poor housing and deprivation causes a lot of health problems. But our slogan, a stronger economy, fairer society, is the wrong way round. What we need is an equitable economy on which we can build a strong, cohesive society. So by equitable economy, I mean the lowest paid person can get a mortgage, he's got full-time work, and can afford to purchase or rent his own home. Social housing, I agree with. I live in social housing myself, but my personal view is that a one-bedroom home.
Could you ask a question? I'm just conscious over the time and the number of questions we've got to get through.
The question is, should the focus of the Liberal Democrat slogan be an equitable economy that rather than that's fair for all, so people can eliminate the homelessness problem?
Yeah, and it's a good question. I think that in the end, it's a little bit similar to the last part of my answer to Mary. I think we support equality. Equality in every sense. Equality to marry who you wish, to live where you wish, to be able to be educated, to make freedom of religion, freedom of speech, all of those things. But we also believe in equality in terms of opportunity, the ability to make what you can out of your life to be the best that you can be and to contribute to the level that you wish to, the level that you are capable of being. And I observe, just again from my own surroundings, I observe the fact that inequality in this country between individuals, families, streets, estates, villages, towns, whole regions of the United Kingdom, that inequality is not just morally wrong and abhorrent, it is also utterly stupid because it wastes the talents of the people who do not have access to that equality. So we believe absolutely if you want a strong economy and indeed a society that is one in which we would all feel at home at, then you have to have a fair society. A successful country is one that is equal.
Thank you. I think we're going to move on to another topic, which is the NHS. This question's from Faith Ponsonby. Apparently, the NHS is about to collapse. What can be done to keep healthcare, both physical and mental, free at the point of delivery?
Well, thank you, Faith. I mean, you'll have seen in today's papers the warnings from Norman Lamb, and he should know. Norman was an outstanding minister in the health department, a very, very, very rare... a very, very rare health minister who is popular with health practitioners. Incredibly rare. And that tells you an awful lot. And a man who imbibed a heck of a lot from his time in the health department. Obviously, he spoke for our party on health before we were in government, but achieved immense amounts when we were in government. And he speaks as he finds, and he's been backed up by many people within NHS England who have spoken on or off the record over the last few days. But the principal issue that Norman raises is that the demographic crises that we face, an ageing population, a failure to get to grips with the preventative aspects of medicine and of healthcare, a failure to understand and to grasp, as Norman so powerfully and proudly championed, the absolute vital importance of putting mental health at the centre of our health economy. Understanding those things is not going to be progressed if, as has been the case for the last decade or two, the National Health Service is a weaponised political football. The way to solve the NHS crisis, or to meet it or to challenge it, as Norman so rightly says, is to take a leaf out of Beveridge's book. You write a big plan, you build a National Health Service in the interests of the country, of the people you want to provide for, everybody. National Health Service free at the point of use and open to everyone in the country. And you do it by consensus. And Norman has challenged, in fact, challenge is too strong a word. Norman has invited, urged the other parties to sit round a table with him when we were in government, and he's urged them since. And he does so today because there is an answer to the looming NHS crisis, and it is all working together and making a plan to make sure the National Health Service is properly funded, rethought, so that everybody in Britain knows that it cares for them from cradle to grave, and knows also that it will be always free at the point of use.
Thank you. Faith, do you have a supplementary question? Can't see you at the intervention mic, so I'm assuming not.
No.
Oh, sorry.
There's a bit of preventative healthcare going on there.
Thank you.
Sorry, Faith. Sorry.
Yes, thank you very much, Tim. Yeah, there's a lot that has gone wrong under the Conservative governments and previous Labour governments, indeed, with our National Health Services. PFI is one dimension, and also the whole business of the increase in drug costs and the decision-making, the desperate decision-making on how we fund drugs for people who need them, but possibly are only getting a limited quality of life. There's so many questions to answer with national health, and I don't know how we solve them. I really don't.
I kind of think, and I don't want to take away from us, Faith, the opportunity to quite rightly and in accordance with our principles and our values and our concern for our communities to campaign on specific health issues. We jolly well should. We always should. But I also think that part of the solution to that massive, intractable set of problems that you outlined there will be more likely met if we are able, as a political community, as a national community, to be able to talk about these things openly and honestly. I don't want to say think the unthinkable, but at least be able to say things without fear that it will be immediately knocked down but for a short-term political stunt. We are surely common inheritors of the Beveridge NHS legacy, and we are all of us commonly interested, personally and in every other sense, in the NHS's success and survival in the future. And it doesn't do us any good, it certainly doesn't do the NHS any good if we weaponise the National Health Service. We must be prepared to talk together in a consensual way about how we deal with those ethical issues, how we deal with the cost issues, but above all else, how we learn to provide healthcare in a joined-up way that puts mental health at the absolute centre of what we do, how we make sure that preventative care is absolutely first and foremost in what we are dealing with, but also how we end this false and damaging divide between the NHS and social care. And shall I take a couple from the... Okay, so I have to take two. Yes, there, and yes, there. Yeah, the lady on the sort of back row there.
Hello, Tim. My name's Linda Chang. I've been involved in the health service for many years, for over 30 years. And I totally agree with you. The health service is managed very much by whatever the political flavour is of the month at the moment. And there's just so much change. What my experience is that the main moaners about the health service or complain about the changes that are so bad. I mean, the moans about Alistair Campbell in the last administration was terrible. It's the medics themselves that don't unite and use their experience about the health service. What can we do to unite them rather than them working for their own interests and their own medical schools to really have some input so they're not so disillusioned about the politicians, and to give them a voice to make the health service better and to use their ideas?
Okay, thanks, Linda. It's an extensive question. I'll pick on a couple of the points that you raised there. I mean, I think the first thing, as you say, change and change and change. Sometimes you fear for change's sake. In the public services as a whole is massively debilitating. I've often thought that the most radical thing a Secretary of State for Health could ever do is inherit the job and say, do you know what, we're going to leave things as they are. We're going to leave things as we are. We'll let people get on with keeping people well and making people better. And there's an argument for saying that whilst there are always things we need to do in terms of reform, the radical shake-ups and restructuring are just not helpful. I remember it working in higher education myself, as some great management science guru once wrote, every time you restructure, you bleed. It means as an organisation, it means as individuals. In terms of the team player spirit, if that's the right phrase for people working in the health service, I just observe that if you work in any organisation where goodwill is eroded, then you will have people effectively working to rule and looking out for themselves. And you see that impact across the whole of the public sector in many ways, where governments or local authorities have chosen to try and squeeze more and more and more out of their employees, to the extent their employees do not go the extra mile anymore. And I've seen that myself again in my professional life before I was a member of Parliament. And we need to understand that goodwill is something you can't put a price on. And the National Health Service is something that in many ways expects goodwill from its staff, in which case its staff must be managed in ways which are gentle, which are encouraging, and are not, for example, like the new junior doctors contract, where there's exploitation of people. Because if we want people to choose these vital careers, we need to prove that we value them. Okay, thank you. And there's a question there. Yeah, young guy at the back there. Hiya.
Hi. Earlier this week in Prime Minister's Questions, we saw David Cameron quite laughably claim credit for Norman Lamb's achievements on mental health issues. Quite simply, what are we going to do to stop people like David Cameron and the Tories, and to a lesser extent Labour, trying to change history on this, on our achievements in government?
It's a great question, and I think two ways of looking at it. And in the first place, if we as Liberal Democrats, and Nick Clegg and Norman Lamb in particular, have managed to do a series of things, really brave things, that have made mental health mainstream and make mental health the kind of issue that David Cameron and Jeremy Corbyn feel they need to talk about and act on, where we have achieved an awful lot. If we've made mental health mainstream, that is a massive achievement. And although we do these things out of the goodness of our heart, we would like some votes. And I think there is clearly an issue. And we saw it during the coalition years as well, but we see it all the more afterwards, where the Conservatives in particular claim credit for things that we did. And it's been, I guess, the real tragedy of the defeat on May the 7th is it almost took that in order to show in sharp relief what the Liberal Democrats had achieved. And that's not just on mental health. And the pressure on NHS budgets locally and nationally means that mental health services are now being cut back. The cap on social care costs now being kicked into the long grass. As we've heard, the GP, or rather the junior doctors contract becoming so utterly ungenerous and so discouraging for those people entering the profession. Just in the health service alone, you get a sense of why the Liberal Democrats mattered so much. It's terrible that we had to go through that defeat on May the 7th to prove our point. But having done that, our job now is to proudly stand for our heritage, our reputation, our achievements in the 5 years in power, and to fight every cut and change, negative reactionary policy that the Tories put in our absence.
Thank you, and can I thank the last questioner for keeping the question short and sharp and to the point, so that we can get through a large lot more. We're now going to move on to the Middle East, and I've got a question from Charles Lawley, and I believe this is his first conference. So, question from Charles is: given that Palestine fulfills the requirement of a state in international law, wouldn't British recognition now encourage parties in favour of peace?
Sense on all this is that it would be preferable if the recognition of the state of Palestine could come about through a process where neither side feels that they have been beaten. We believe in a two-state solution, both within secure borders, living in peace with each other. And my fear, so that our preference surely, or my preference, and surely it's up to you to make your mind up, but my preference would be that recognition of the state of Palestine would come about through a process of consent. But every day that Benjamin Netanyahu plonks more settlers into Palestine, the West Bank, and does that in clear attempt to undo the possibility of there being a two-state solution. Every day that passes makes it all the more likely, or all the less likely, that can be done in a consensual way. And I would love it to be done in a consensual way. I am a friend of Israel, and a good friend tells you when you are doing something really stupid and against your own interests. And So I want the recognition of the state of Palestine to come about through consent as a result of a peaceful process, but Netanyahu is making it increasingly difficult for that to be the case. So the day is probably approaching when we will unilaterally, or the United Nations collectively, recognize the state of Palestine.
Charles, do you have a supplementary question?
Hi, Charles. Sorry. Boycotts and all sorts of other things that put the South African regime under pressure. I think the South African regime had no right to have any sense of feeling under impending threat. And the Israeli state feels under impending threat. It does not react in a way which is in any way tolerable, by the way. But I think we need to understand, as I said in the answer to the previous question, or your first question, is that the best way out of this is one which is of consensus. We have not solved that crisis in the Middle East if we trade one aggrieved community for another aggrieved community. So the fundamental lesson I learned from South Africa, and in particular from Nelson Mandela's example, is forgiveness and tolerance. Thanks. To take two from the floor?
Maybe just one.
Just the one?
So we can get through.
That's probably because maybe the questions are being concise, but maybe the answerer isn't. Okay, let's try one from, over there.
Hi Tim, John from Reading.
Hi John.
I've just handed in a 100,000-word PhD thesis on Syrian temples. And over the past few years, as I've been working, the situation's got worse and worse. The main temples I was working on have actually been blown up in the last few weeks. Yeah. How do liberals deal with people like Daesh, or as we call them, ISIS?
It's extremely difficult. I think, first of all, I guess in this world, we know that we're going to come up against some people with whom we cannot even have a conversation, it would appear. Around the world more generally, we think about Iran, for example, even North Korea, if they would respond. We know that if we only ever talk to people who share our values, we're going to be very lonely. Very lonely. But there are some who put them so beyond the pale. I guess with pragmatism and understanding, and liberals are seekers after truth. And what as the common parlance, ISIS, my understanding of that situation is that you have a regime there which is utterly fundamentalist, theologically extreme, and believes they are part of the end times. And what they desperately want is for their plight, their fight, their scenario to be depicted as the West, the armies of Rome, versus extreme Islam. In reality, 97% of those murdered by ISIS are Muslims. In reality, it is a war against an extreme and perverted, violent aberration, perversion of Islam against the Muslim world, and we should stand with moderate Muslims. And on the practical side, even if there was a military solution that could somehow help, and I'm not convinced, shall we say, we need to understand that partly because of the ISIS theology and ideology and outlook, worldview, but also partly because of our previous government's decision to illegally invade Iraq. We have changed the narrative of intervention, sadly. And what we must not do is play into that false ISIS narrative of it being the West versus Islam. So ISIS must be tackled, but they must be tackled by regional powers. They must be tackled by diplomacy with those around the ISIS lands. And we must do all we can, of course, to defend vastly important historic buildings. So I should go back out there.
Thank you for that. We're now going to move on to a very different subject area, and that's youth issues and in particular votes for the under-18s. This question's from Ellie Hopgood from Durham Central. I'm 17 and I don't believe the majority of 16 or 17-year-olds have enough non-influential information to vote. How would you combat this?
Okay, I mean, first of all, I think it's a good question because I think the awareness of each voter and the possession of sufficient education and knowledge to be able to cast a vote, it's a really, really important point. I've often come across people who are just about old enough to vote who'll say, oh, I don't know enough to what to do, so I won't take part, I won't cast a vote. And my flippant reply is, I know people 3 times your age who know less than you do, and they vote habitually. However, and the point is, we are all on a journey one way or another towards, through passage through life and different experiences and enthusiasm and our states of mind. So we are all, in one sense, right. We are all within our rights to make our own choices and to be able to participate in the process. My sense, and it's only really from taking part as a foot soldier in the referendum in Scotland last year, I remember particularly on polling day being stood, I think, on Hoyk High Street and bumping into 3 young women, clearly, in their uniform from school on their lunch break. They were off to vote. 3 of them in the borders, 2 voting no, 1 voting yes, and they were all still mates, which is a bit of an example for everybody. But what was also really, the fact that they had been given the vote made them engage. If they'd not been given the vote, they perhaps wouldn't have engaged. So it is a bit of a chicken and egg situation here. But I want to just throw out, so first of all, I think if you are 16 or 17, you should be able to vote. In the EU referendum, in coming referendums, any other form, and in local European and national government elections throughout the United Kingdom. I believe that because at 16 and 17, you have the ability to pay taxes, to work, to join the army, and to act as an adult in every other way. It is wrong to me that we deny you the right to vote. But, and this is where Ellie's point is powerful and important. I want to just lay out a challenge to you because a critically important part of the political education process is us engaging with young people in a serious and honest and non-patronising way. Do that not just by use of social media, but do that by being in the places where young people are, talking to schools, talking to sixth forms, talking to universities, raising those issues, and don't just assume that young people are only motivated by youth issues. I joined this party at 16 because something got me in my gut. It wasn't a youth issue, it was an issue that affected everybody. And that's how most people get involved in politics, because something got them there. I challenge you to go out and get the young people of this country in the gut and get them on our side.
Ellie, do you have a supplementary question?
Hi, Ellie.
A lot of people so with the general election last year, we asked a lot of people in my sixth form if they could vote, how would they vote? And many said that they weren't confident enough in their political knowledge as a whole to vote. And so they'd ask their parents or look to their parents or regional, how the region votes. How would you go about sort of combating that? How would you give the education as such to give the youth confidence in voting?
Great. I mean, I think, so I better understand your question now. So it is a case of people just taking on the political preferences of parents, family members, and of the society in which they live. I guess, and that, I'm afraid, is often the case, whatever age you put the voting limit at. And the answer is within schools, and not just at sixth form, long before that, through citizenship education, PSHE of all kinds, from 11 years at least upwards. I mean, I go into primary schools regularly. not, by the way, to preach liberal democracy, because that would be probably wrong. But I go in there just to engage them with the political process, so they understand how local authorities, how government works, and to talk about some of those big issues that will affect them, issues like climate change, issues like the fact that so many young people around the world don't have the privilege of going to school like they do, and just trying to make people conscious. I think we've been too scared of politics in the classroom in the past. It was not done as a decent thing, or not considered to be the decent thing to talk politics any part of British public life in the past. And Margaret Thatcher, of course, in particular, did her best to stamp out as just, left-wing political correctness, trying to bring in any kind of political education. I completely disagree. You can, in a totally neutral way, give people the tools and the confidence they need to engage in the political process, and we should start it long before sixth form.
Can you just take just one more?
One, it's okay, one from the audience. Yeah. Go for it.
Hello, hi, I'm Peter, I'm 15. Just a couple of weeks ago, I had my first politics lesson in the classroom, in my citizenship lesson. The turnaround that I saw from just a couple of weeks beforehand, being a bit of a politics nerd, asking my friends how they would vote, and seeing absolute apathy from almost everyone, saying they have no idea, think they're all liars, think they're all a load of rubbish. After that first lesson, people were immediately more engaged. And that pointed out to me that this is something that we should be focusing on, real political education in the classroom. So could you, and furthermore the Liberal Democrats, support mandatory political education as at the forefront of secondary schools?
Thank you very much. So, Peter, as a political nerd, I hope you feel at home in this sort of self-help group here. And I'm really grateful that you're a member of the party. And I think, so yeah, you make a great point. I think when you engage, politics is really exciting. And it's not just policy, it's the politics of it, almost the soap opera of politics, the mechanics of politics, as well as the values and the principles that drive us. And I think, we insult young people when we think they're not ready for it yet. So I think it should be a core part of what should be happening in schools long before sixth form. And I'm delighted that you're with us and we've got your passion. And I hope many more people who are, passionate about politics like you decide that it's better to be a player than a spectator.
Thanks. Got a couple more questions I want to get through.
Okay.
I'm not sure whether we're going to have time for supplementaries from them.
Okay, okay.
The first one is from Evan Harris.
Who?
Possibly the reason we won't have time for supplementary.
Very unfair.
What sort of welcome would you give a new generation of social democrats currently in the Labour Party who reject socialist economics and class war?
I wonder what prompted that. So I am a Liberal and a Social Democrat. I joined the Liberal Party when I was 16 in 1986, and 2 years later, the Liberal Party merged with the SDP. I enthusiastically campaigned and voted for merger between our parties. We came up with this peculiar name, the Social and Liberal Democrats at the time, which has since been pared down to Liberal Democrats. But Social and Liberal Democrats is what we are. So I am a Liberal and I am a Social Democrat. And I take the view that these are immensely momentous times for our party. Who would have expected, after the devastation of our result on May the 7th, that we'd have got 20,000 new members? Who would have thought we'd have gained more council seats than anybody else since the general election? Who would have thought that in the 27 years since that merger, that 53, 54 conferences we've had in that time, this one today is the biggest ever? And so we put ourselves in a position where we matter again. And then other parties can make their own choices. But I observe with David Cameron's increasingly unpleasant, illiberal, frankly un-British rhetoric about refugees, his utter short-termism over the EU referendum and the risk to our place in the world, our relevance and our prosperity, he is making over our place with the threat to our place in the European Union. And then I look, obviously, at what's happening in the Labour Party, where a desire to move even further away from economic credibility undermines their ability, anybody's ability, to be able to provide social justice, equality, and fairness. And so I'm saying that, I am not a homewrecker for Labour MPs. I am not a homewrecker, but I am a home builder. My door is wide. My metaphors are getting all over the place now, but my door is wide open to Liberals and Social Democrats who are not yet members of the Liberal Democrats. And this is a very bold and open offer to those people. And I'm not just talking about members of Parliament and councillors and lords and members of the Scottish Parliament and the National Assembly of Wales and the local and the Greater London Assembly and the European Parliament and all those parliamentarians and elected people. I'm talking about the massive majority of people in this country who are voters but are not elected to any particular office, many of whom consider themselves to be supporters of the Tories or perhaps Labour. To you, if you are in your heart a Liberal or a Social Democrat, you have a home in the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you. I am going to move on just to what is the final question. We have unfortunately run out of time, but the final question is from Derek Mann. Elton John wants to meet Mr. Putin. Who do you want to meet, and what will you say?
Oh, man. Oh, Derek, there's a serious point there, isn't there? Because I've never met Elton John or Vladimir Putin. And I can just tell you that I have an ambition. Nick Clegg got himself on the banned persons list for Russia. And he got it, amongst other reasons, for standing up for LGBT rights against Vladimir Putin's outrageous discrimination. And I'd love one of two things to happen. I'd love, most of all, for Elton John to actually have a phone call with Putin and persuade him that he is wrong and for Russia to change. That's what I prefer. But if we can't have that, I'd love and be proud to join Nick Clegg on the banned list. Who would I have a one-to-one with? Was that the question?
Who would you like to meet, and what would you say?
All right, okay. I guess you expected me to say some very important political or philosophical figure, and instead I am going to say Wendy Smith from Prefab Sprout. Obviously Prefab Sprout from County Durham, Whitton Gilbert to be precise. The greatest band in the history of ever. Steve McQueen, the greatest album in the history of ever. And Wendy Smith was my teenage pin-up. During the leadership election, obviously I was put on the back foot when Norman got the endorsement of Dappy. And I thought, I can't have this. And so I DM'd on Twitter Wendy Smith and say, what's the chances of you coming out in support of my candidacy? And she very politely replied, I'm thinking about it. And she's still thinking about it. And if I did meet her, I'd just say in a high-pitched, squeaky, nervous voice, I've got all your records.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank, on behalf of the whole audience, Tim, for putting yourself through that. But I'd also like to thank all the people that submitted questions, particularly the 40 or 50 questioners that we couldn't get to in the time allotted. But thank you all very much. And Tim, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks all of you. God bless. Thank you. I'll give you...